Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us once again today for our usual weekly Sunday talk within the Nine-Sided Circle. I'm one of your two hosts, Noor Kyle,
And I'm the other one of your two hosts, Mushtaq Ali.
and we are so happy to have you join us. Some of you have joined us twice today. Um, for those of you who are here with us live, welcome. For those of you watching on the replay, thanks for being here. We should have a fun time tonight. I think Mushtaq's pretty revved up for this topic. But we do need to do our spiel, don't we?
The spiel, yes.
Yes.
Dear friends, thank you for watching us. You're making me laugh by laughing. It's not fair. So, thank you for watching us. And if you're watching us on YouTube, welcome. And if this is your first time at our channel, welcome twice. We would like to ask you to please consider subscribing to our channel. It's a small thing for you, but it's a big thing for us. We are so close to hitting that 1,000 mark so we can start demonetizing our videos. I know that doesn't make a lot of sense because most people do this to make money, but we do this to not make money. We're pretty sure that we're not making any money on this, but that's all right. We don't want you to be spammed with commercials. And as soon as we get to 1,000, we can join the YouTube Partners program, and then we have some control over who does what to who on which videos. And I plan on gleefully going through and demonetizing every video that we have ever done, except for the ones that we have that nobody ever watches. I might let those be monetized still, especially if I make them private. Can I say that? Anyway,
Yeah.
so please subscribe to us, and it helps us. The more subscriptions we get, the further up we get in the YouTube algorithms in our race to the top of something. And also, please consider liking our video. That little like button down there, it just takes a second to reach out and go click. And when you do, you will receive blessings. God will smile upon you, or at least laugh at you, which is almost as good. Um, and it again, it helps us. It helps us get up in the ratings, helps YouTube notice that we're putting out content that people like, and it will allow people to find us easier. So if you have friends and you'd like them to find us, click the like button. If you have enemies and you would like them to find us, click the like button. It's a win-win, no matter what. So click that like button. And please consider leaving a comment. We love hearing from you. We try and answer every comment. We take every question seriously. We take every comment seriously, except for the funny ones, which we will laugh at. If you're telling a joke, we'll laugh at your jokes. Um, so consider leaving a comment. We love to hear from you. There you go. What are we talking about tonight, Noor?
Spiel. Good job. We are going to be talking about something that's really relevant to all of us, I would say. We're talking about the states of contraction and expansion. We'll get into what those are, but we're going to be talking about those specifically from the point of view of what we call Sufi stations. And stations are kind of stations on the path, is essentially what it is referring to.
Mm-hmm.
And these are ways of being, but they have a specific context. And yeah, Mushtaq, why don't you lead us off? And
Okay.
I'm sure I'll have things to add as we go.
Yeah. So you have two things. You have states and stations. A station is a maqam, M-A-Q-A-M, and it is the place where you are abiding for the moment. So I do some work and I reach a particular maqam along the work, and I hang out there until I can get further or regress, as the case may be. Um, that's all very cool, but my teacher advised me don't pay attention to your stations. If you do, you might get all ego caught up in how good you're doing and everything, and where's the fun in that? So uh, that was one thing. But states are called hal, Hal, and it's the hard H, not the soft H. Hal is your the conditions in which you move, and there are considered to be six all told, um, and these are all binaries, and these six binaries will fit in with the six laws, interestingly enough, or the six processes. You have fear and hope, contraction and expansion, gathering and dispersion, intoxication and sobriety, and annihilation and subsistence. Those are the six main how that people move through. Those also can become stations. You can end up in a makam of annihilation, which is kind of weird because there's nobody to be there. Um, or you can end up in the makam of subsistence if you're very, very cool and God likes you a lot. But for us tonight, we're talking about the states, not the stations, but the states of contraction and expansion. Because this is something that as you work on the path, you're going to move through all the time.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. I think I may have been a little bit
You were just excited.
confusing. Yeah. So carry on.
Mm. After you.
After me.
After you.
Well, I mean, those are terms I've always kind of gotten mixed up when it comes to the Arabic terminology and such. So I'm not surprised I got a little bit ahead of myself. That's all.
Oh, that's all right. It's not an error. It's just you got excited. You want to get all the way up to the stations when we haven't got to the states yet.
Yes.
So, expansion, contraction. Expansion is a state of opening up and being outward. Contraction is a state of pulling back and being inward. And my good friend Sheikh Ibrahim, I'm going to actually read you the quote that I took from one of his lectures. He has the most perfect description of this. Contraction and expansion are connected. There is breathing. You cannot keep inhaling. At some point, you must exhale, and then you inhale again. Your heart beats and gives you life through its ongoing expansion and contraction. This is part of life, duality. For the Sufi, we try to keep a larger perspective so that we can ride these waves a little easier, like a cork on the water. He is always elegant. Eloquent. Elegant, too. Um, and usually when people talk about expansion and contraction, they talk about joy and happiness and then sadness and fear and loathing and all of this kind of stuff. And it's not that. It is the natural opening and closing of yourself to the outer world and inner world. So when I go into a state of contraction, if I don't start telling myself stories about it, it just says it's time to go inside right now. It's time to pay attention to your inner life. And my expansion is it's time to go outside. Let's play in the clover. Let's have a good time. Let's interact with people. Let's do all of these fun things that you like to do. So when Noor and I are doing these talks, for instance, we like to be in a state of expansion when we do these talks. Sometimes that's not possible, and we'll sit here and we'll mumble at you a little bit, and we'll tell you what we're going to tell you, but it's going to be kind of more inward,
More mellow.
more mellow.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense so far?
Can the new guy ask a question?
Of course,
Yeah,
one hopes.
please.
Yeah.
seems like these states are not exclusive, because you mentioned one of them is fear and something else. And it seems to me you could obviously be full of fear when you're in the Zoom call with the Sufis, right? Tell me a
Don't
bit
worry,
more
it
about
won't hurt
these.
you.
Tell me a bit more about that.
Well, um, fear and hope are that's like the baseline state, and you if it's usually described as you fear God because you are a terrible evil sinner and God is going to punish you, but you hope for salvation. That's the classic answer. But the real answer is that you experience fear. Everybody experiences fear. Humans are fear-based beings. That's what we do best. And we also experience hope, that longing for something better. It's again a form of expansion and contraction. All of these are kind of that. Does that kind of help you?
Not really, but I'll listen to you talk some more and maybe I'll get it.
Okay. Well, I have been known to be somewhat opaque at times. Continue asking questions, and we'll see if we can get to an answer that serves you. Um, where were we? Oh, yes. So I'm in a state of expansion. Life is good, energy is flowing. And I reach the natural end of it and I go into a state of contraction. Now, if I am a basic normal person, I'm liable to start telling myself stories about the state of contraction. Like, oh my God, I have no energy. I feel depressed. I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't even want to deal with people. Maybe I need drugs. Who knows? And then all of a sudden, I enter into a state of expansion again, and I can tell myself stories about that. And it's the stories that you tell yourself about the states that catch you. That's the important thing to understand. When you enter into one of these states and you start telling yourself stories about it, you're going to get lost in that state. And this is where you get emotional travails. Does that make sense? Jonathan,
What is it about the story that is the problem?
stories are something that you can get attached to. Let's say I have a feeling in my stomach, right up against the diaphragm, a kind of tingly feeling. I can notice that feeling, or I can begin to go, oh, I'm afraid of something. This is how I feel when I feel fear. And then I can make up a story about why I'm afraid. Do you understand what I'm talking about? How the story can get you lost? And it's the identification with the story that traps you in these states, in these binaries. Yes, no, maybe?
Yes, thank you. I'm back.
And
I mean,
Mustakim,
yeah, I actually, we should definitely get to Mr. Keem, but I actually think it's an interesting moment for you and me, Mushtak, because
yeah.
you are in a state of, semi-expansion right now.
Oh, I am in a total state
Yeah.
of expansion right now. I
Whereas
have a lot of energy.
I'm in a biologically induced state of contraction.
Yes.
And
And
I don't mind
I'm
talking
actually in
about
a
that, but
coffee-induced state of expansion.
yes. And um well, we can, yeah, like I'm stumbling over my words right now, even because I'm in a very inwardly directed state. My energy is downshifted. This is because I am in the part of my menstrual cycle where my hormones are winding down. Whereas when I get to the opposite point in this cycle, the point where I'm ovulating as opposed to menstruating. And I share this with you because I think it's very practical knowledge that we can all use as a tangible way that this happens just in everyday life, separate from the emotional stories that we get into. Yeah, at the opposite point, I feel very energetic. I feel very outgoing. I feel very engaged with my environment. I feel warm and fuzzy. And now I feel not cold, but I feel more inward, as Mushtaq mentioned. I feel, as I said, emotionally downshifted. And I feel more sensitive, which means that I could make an emotional story out of it that says, oh, I'm becoming depressed. I'm ill, perhaps. But
Or you could go, nobody is willing to give me the space that I need. That's
yeah,
another one. That's
that's
taking
true.
the outward sign. Yeah, you never
Yep,
do that, but you could.
I could. I mean, that's not how it manifests for me, but I think that's not uncommon. Yes. So, yeah.
Yeah. And there's a reason why in traditional societies, oftentimes there was what was known usually as the Moon Lodge, where women were allowed to retreat and have a week off without having to put up with the shit of life and men.
Not everyone needs that, but it would be a nice thing to have. That's for
Yeah.
sure. I think I personally need to incorporate allowances for this time for myself because it affects me so deeply.
So if I talk a little bit more tonight, it's not because I'm trying to mansplain everything. It's because I'm trying to give Noor a little bit of a break.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. It means a lot to me to not have to overextend. So thank you, Mushtaq.
Yeah.
So getting back to Mr. Keen's question,
Yes.
um, how about the pause? Any significance in the expansion contraction? He's asking, where does the
Yeah.
pause fit in this?
Yeah. The pause can fit on either end or right in the middle. And it's a little bit beyond tonight's talk. But
Yeah.
ask me privately and I will fill you in on it. But if we got into the, that's a good question to ask during the Sufi group, for instance, where people have the more of the language to uh, understand what the hell I'm saying.
Yeah, we don't want to get too far afield, but
Yeah,
that is a good question, Mr.
it's a
Keen.
really
Thank you.
good question. Yeah. And Chris just popped in.
Hi, Chris. All right. So where
So,
were you?
where were I? Uh, I were somewhere in the Ottoman Empire in the 18th century.
Well,
Um,
uh, Chris says yo to everybody. You were sharing with us. Yeah, you're feeling more external.
yeah,
Yeah.
my energy is pretty high right now. I tend to pump myself up for these double days, as Noor can tell you. I will get really do every practice I know to get my energy up and out there so that I can do 2 talks in one day. And then tomorrow I will relax and definitely go inward. Um, so, back to the story thing. This natural state of expansion and contraction, which, as Ibrahim points out, is like breathing. We do this. We have these energetic states and we have these quiet states. And we don't want to tell ourselves stories about them. We just want to experience them as they are and find ways to not resist them. If you, the old saying, "What you resist persists," is kind of true. Um, and it can be unhealthy if you try and hold on to an expansive state. You end up becoming manic. If you try and hold on to a contracted state, or get away from a contracted state even, you could end up with depression. And why do that to yourself? So, what do we do as we move through these states? I mean, right now, check inside and ask yourself, am I in a state of expansion or a state of contraction, relatively speaking? And it might be 1 degree from zero in either direction at this point, but I think everybody here is going to be sensitive enough to notice. So, show of hands, expansion. Yay, contraction. Have no clue. Yeah,
That's totally okay.
yeah. So, if you are in a state, in either state, the first thing you do is you find a way to express gratitude to the universe for your state. This is the way I understand to work with this, and it works really well for me. Gratitude to the universe. Yeah, life is good. I feel all of this energy. Thank you, universe, for allowing me to do this without it blowing the top of my head off. I'm really grateful for that. If you are in a state of contraction, you do the same thing. Find a reason to be grateful for the contraction. It's like, God has given me a time to take a little break. I can relax and let myself go inward. Either one. That little sense of gratitude helps balance out any stories you might want to tell. It in itself is kind of a story, but it's a healthy story. It doesn't give you reason to be attached to it. Make sense? Now, when you are in a state of contraction, the stories will come up. And the useful thing to do is often just observe them. This is where self-observation really comes in handy. And you and this state of contraction will give you the opportunity to observe the kinds of conditioned patterns that happen in your head and begin to withdraw energy from them. Because remember, all patterns that you have, all conditioning that you have only exist because you feed it. It lives off your energy because that's all it's got. So you withdraw the energy from a conditioned pattern that you have, the pattern begins to dissipate. It takes a while. When you are in a state of expansion, this is where you can do some serious work. Enjoy sitting down and meditating, but better to do a walking meditation. Better to do the external work that you need to do. Practice your arts, if whatever arts you have, martial arts, fiber arts, whatever. And use the energy to actually get things done. And in either case, give yourself permission to do that. Does it make sense? Pretty simple stuff.
I was wondering,
Yes.
sometimes, it's just natural expansion and contraction, and sometimes there might be an explanation and you need to do something.
Mm-hmm.
How do you tell which one you're in?
Can you give me an example?
You're contracted because you're dehydrated. You need a story of, I need some water.
Okay. I don't think that that's actually a state of contraction in and of itself. It's more your body is saying, look, dude, you're thirsty. Water yourself. You could be in a state of expansion and notice that you're thirsty and you need water.
Mm.
So it's a bit different than that.
Are there external causes for expansion and contraction, or is it strictly internal rhythm?
Now, there can be external causes. Your teacher may help you move into one or the other for certain types of work. And that's nothing we have to worry about here, but that's a pretty common thing. You need to be in a state of contraction right now. Boom, sit down, meditate, go inside. Things like that. Or events can shock you into a state of expansion or contraction if you allow yourself to be affected for any length of time by the event. And this is where the stories come in, because if you have a particular, say, story of contraction, and something in the world happens that relates to that story, you're going to be naturally going to move into that state of contraction until you free yourself from being attached to the story. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Okay. Feel free to ask more questions, because I have not done a lecture on this subject or a talk on this subject or a discussion on this subject for 30 years. So I may be a bit rusty.
I suppose one of the possibilities would be a person is bipolar.
Yeah, and that's definitely a chemical thing, right? That's stuff in your brain is going haywire. It's cross-wired. And you get things that look a lot like states of expansion and contraction, but they go way out to the edges usually. But yeah, that's something that's in the area of pathology, and we don't really deal with that. But yeah, a bipolar person can definitely swing through the far ends of expansion and contraction. And as Sydney points out, or
Yes.
pregnant. Yeah, that goes back to the hormone thing. And it's true that what you do with your body will affect your states. Having a good meal can put you in a state of expansion or contraction. Too much sugar, and I get into a real state of contraction. Whole lot of tasty, yummy beef, and I get very expanded. Go figure.
A good conversation. I find
Okay.
sometimes that brings me into a state of expansion.
Oh yeah, conversation is one of the ways that you can really do it. Group expansion. And it goes back to what we were talking about today with group flow.
Yes. So we have a question from Ailey.
Ellie, yeah.
He says, what's happening when you come for the first time on Earth? The process of breathing. Do you want to expand on that, Ailey? I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I
I'm not sure what
follow
you mean.
exactly. Yeah.
You mean when you're born?
Yeah, when you're born, for the baby,
Yes.
what's happening? The first breath,
Yeah.
the process of oxygen and the scream or no scream. What is happening there in this subject of expression?
I'm trying to
Extraction.
remember back, and it's a little bit further back than I can remember personally. But definitely with that first breath, you know, they say in some traditions that you're not truly human until you take your first breath. You're not a spirit. You're not a spiritual being until you take your first breath. But that you're getting oxygen from your mother, so it's not like you're unfamiliar with the substance. But the first time you get it for yourself has got to be a rush. It's got to be a shock to the system. And I suspect that I can't say that it would put a baby in a state of expansion or contraction. I think it could go either way in some senses. I just do not have enough experience with birth to give you a decent answer to that. I've
Okay.
only ever delivered 2 babies in my life, and I was too busy freaking out to really be paying attention to the more subtle stuff going on. But do you have a thought on that? Can you give me an answer to that question?
No, I'm just wondering what it must be. It must be a shock for for a child.
Oh,
What,
yeah, absolutely.
yeah. And the life force. At that moment, a lot of things are happening, isn't it?
Yeah,
Because in the uterus, you are fully dependent on the mother, and then by delivery, you have to do it by your own.
yeah, you become an individual being at birth.
Yeah.
Yeah, so those are some very good questions to which I wish I had better answers. Um,
Good things to
Okay.
contemplate, though.
yeah,
Yeah.
I will have to see if I know anybody who can give me a more definitive answer on that question, because now I'd like to know.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Ailey. So, McQueen, I saw you had like a wave. Did you have something you want to share or ask?
Yeah, another simple question, just clarifying some of these basics.
Yeah.
It sounds sometimes the way you describe state, it sounds like simply the word I know is mood. But can you sort of clarify that for me, please?
It's a good
Yeah,
question. Yeah.
a state is more like a mood on steroids. It's actually, um, I can sit here and I can be in an expanded state and be in a good mood or a bad mood. Nor might say something that insults me. And I won't go into a state of contraction. I will still be in a state of expansion, but it will change from my happy-go-lucky self to growling and snarling and maybe barking at her or something. Um, but the expansion will still be there. So a mood will be expressed differently depending on your state.
Does that make sense? Yeah, good. Cool. And feel free to ask more questions if you have
Yeah.
them, whatever. Yeah.
We work best when people ask questions.
Mr. Keem says expansion, contraction does it happen in the body, the head, the heart, and the heart, or beyond all that?
It definitely happens in all 3 centers at once. The one center may be more active. Like with Noor, when she gets in states of expansion, her heart center is a little bit more active than her head or her moving center. With me, it's either my head center gets more active or my moving center gets more active. And the heart center is not quite as affected. I'm still working on balancing this shit out, folks. Nobody here is perfect. But yeah, and beyond, probably in the magnetic center, in the higher being bodies, as Mr. Gurdjieff calls them, there might be something going on there, but I'm still working on the 3 centers myself.
That's handful enough most of the time.
Yeah.
Or most of us, at least. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Keem.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, so one thing I appreciate about this conversation is that we are talking about these in a neutral way.
Yeah.
Traditionally, classically, there can be some would you describe it?
Judgy.
Judgy, yes. Like, ooh, contraction is bad.
Yeah, it's like
Expansion is
I was
good.
reading yesterday, I think it was, and studying up for this topic, a classical thing saying, when you are in a state of contraction, God has withdrawn himself from you and he's torturing you so that you'll learn something.
It's
And
a
when you're in a state
punishment.
of, yeah, if you're a state of expansion, God is giving his graces on you. And I say that, first of all, you are not separate from God. Second of all, um, God wouldn't do that shit. He's not that petty. He's not some petty old guy in the sky being all grumpy at you. Um, and so for expansion and contraction, if you're in a state of contraction, God has not withdrawn himself from you. He's still right there. I mean, how could he not be there? As the Quran says, I am closer to you than your own jugular vein. Um, So you are always part of the divine presence, regardless of the state that you're in. And that's something that you have to remember because there are, in the classical literature, there is all of this guilt tripping going on about these states. And none of that's true. It's just not true. Chris, what do you think? Missed you, man.
Yes, missed y'all too. And I do have a question.
Yes.
So if wholly affirming is to expansion as wholly denying is to contraction, then wholly reconciling would be to?
Wholly reconciling would be to allow both states to move naturally through you without being attached to either.
And that's the takeaway for everyone, whether you know
Yeah.
those terms or not.
Yeah.
You move freely through it all. Yeah.
Yeah.
Chris, continue.
It's the noticing that's the reconciling. It sounds like you're saying.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. Another good question.
Yeah. Okay. So Ailey asks, in the early talk, that's the one from this morning, you talked about samadhi. That's the same as the practice, which is the same as the practice of flow. Are you then in a state of the world?
24.
Oh, okay. We're talking about.
Okay, we're talking Gurdjieffian
Yeah.
world state. I think that when you enter into a flow state, you could be in, even in world 48, though it's not as likely, probably world 24, to use Gurdjieff's terms. You're not really in any world, but it's a way to talk about it. And I think that with practice, yes, you could go and touch on world 12, which is a pretty high state. I think most people never will, but I think yes, you could. For those of you who have no idea what we're talking about, basic ray of creation stuff. And it has to do with the number of constraints that is put upon being at any one time. Does that make sense, Ailey? Either he's taking a moment to type or he's mad and went away.
Well, it's okay. I just wonder, we are, if you're talking about extraction or expansion, I think, oh, we are now talking about the level in the world 96 or 48. And I remember I saw the YouTube about samadhi, and hey, this is world 24. So that's my my reference to what we're
And
talking about.
it's actually a really good and fascinating question, because if you are in that samadhi flow state, there are many, many less constraints upon you than would usually be. You step away from the constraints of 48 and 96. Um, and so
Okay.
I think you have a point there. Yeah. I hadn't ever
Yeah.
thought of that, but yeah, that makes perfect sense. I'm going to
I
go
s-
with what it, I'm going to go with
yeah.
it.
I well, when I follow the the Olympics in China, and
Hmm.
when I observe the states of the athletes, the mind is still, and how they move on the skates, or that, wow, they are on a very, very high level, and how they experience their body, but also the area where they are, and they have to be very, very sharp to do that thing. So I
Yes.
thought, hey, they are in the. How do they do that? To be in that state, and then when they at the final, then they are in another state.
Hmm. Yeah. The athletics is one of the places where a lot of people discover flow state, and they don't quite know what to do with it. Um, so yeah. Cherie, what do you think? You know about this stuff.
A tiny bit, but I'm just thinking about our conversation. So this is for me when you're talking about contraction and expansion being like a breath. So it doesn't matter if one is not equal to the other. Some periods are going to be longer or shorter. So your awareness is recognizing what state that you're in, so that you can just be in that moment. It's not trying to push it into something else, because I was thinking that when someone has achieved flow state in an athletic sense or a physical sense, and they can't reproduce it afterwards after they've peaked, and so they imbibe in more food or alcohol or drugs to try and achieve that. That's not what we're after. We're not trying to achieve this state of being in an ecstasy type of thing. I think that's where
Yeah.
we get mixed up in that. It's not that. Someone asked me, how are you today? And I thought about it and I replied back, not too high, not too low. I'm all right. And it's
Yeah.
like, and everybody thinks like, oh, are you really all right? And I go, I'm okay. I'm not, it's nothing bad about that. Why do we always have to try and jump for this higher happiness and more excitement sort of thing? And I've actually noticed I don't like shopping where there's so much loud music. And the music is so discordant and it's jarring and it's all these different things that is just like, oh, you just lost me as a customer. That there's this push in our culture to have this bigger and bigger experience of something. And you think, no, you don't have to do that. Just be here. Just feel that. And if they're going back into their body and actually feeling, am I contracting or am I expanding? Not good or bad. It's just, I need to contract right now. I had a contraction state after our talk this morning, and I just thought, I'm just going to lie on my bed and look outside, not going to sleep, but just relaxing and feeling. And then it was over and it was time to move back. I could feel the pendulum swing me back, and I thought, okay, I'm getting ready for other things. And that, I feel, is our not necessarily flow state, but you can feel your expansion and contraction, and it's quite lovely actually. Just go with it, how it flows, whatever God's deciding for you in that moment. It's like, accept it and see what happens. Let it unfold naturally versus trying to push it into something, thinking that we have to achieve a certain thing. And also be aware that if we are in a contracted state, and we were talking about depression yesterday, this is why we were talking about it, that being sad, having grief, having sorrow, they are all very real things to experience for their proper amount of time. And you can't tell me what that is. It just is. When it's finished grieving time, you just know it's time to now move on to other things. But it's don't push it away, and don't not grieve. Don't not let that person be sad when something bad has happened, when a loved one is lost. You know, the whole push of buck up, you know, it's over now. It's move on. Well,
Yeah.
hold on a second. There is a time. Some people's time is a bit longer than yours. Just be with them and don't change it. Don't jolly them into something that they're not ready for. Contracted states have this kind of restorative, gathering sense in them, I feel. Am I mistaken?
Let me pass on a trick to you, by the way.
Okay.
I noticed early on about this whole, how are you doing? And it's like, I don't want to give anybody who I don't know, who is not one of my intimates, any sense of how I'm relating to the world. So my answer has been for years, life is good. Because life is good no matter what. No matter how I feel, life is good because life is pretty much better than non-life, as far as I can tell. So feel free to borrow that one or steal it, either way.
Yeah, I mean, that resonates for me, Shuri, in that it is so much easier to just roll with it than try to fight it and judge it and struggle through it. Well, now is the time to be contracted. Soon it will be the time to be expanded, and it will show up when it shows up. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, this is how it's supposed to be right now.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we have two questions. Roland has a really excellent question here, which is, how does the extrovert-introvert dynamic play into this? And that's a good question because let's take, for instance, I am an introvert. I am on the introvert extrovert spectrum. I'm way over to one side. And even so, I will hit states of expansion and I will surf those states and use them to connect with people when I'm in those states. And when I go way over into the introverted state, that's just time for me to shut down. And Nora can tell you, there are times when I will sit down and tune everything out and maybe play a video game or something that just allows me to pull away from the world.
Well, we both do that.
Yeah, we both do that. But she is a little bit more of an extrovert than I am, I think. Would you say so? Yeah.
At this point, I would say so. Yeah.
Yeah. But you will go inside on a regular basis, and it's easier for you to be bouncy and outside.
I think I have a talent for putting on the extrovert.
Yeah.
But I tend to be, my baseline tends to be more introverted too.
Yeah. So the dynamic of this is, how do you use the energy of either state? Because the state is basically energetic. It's the energy of going inward or the energy of going outward. Energy being defined as the ability to do work. So when I am in a state of expansion, that's the time when I can really easily do external work with other people. When I'm in a state of contraction, that's where my inner work comes in. Does that make sense, Roland? Good. And Levita says, can you steal something that is freely given? And the answer is, it's more fun if you do. When I was a kid, there was me and my cousin and watermelons. And watermelons were not ours. But sometimes late at night, we would sneak over to where the watermelons were and steal one. Now, the farmer knew that this would happen. Usually the row on the outside was, he always figured Yeah, something's going to get the watermelons on that roll. And we never grab too many. But I will tell you that watermelons that you snitch from a field taste way better than the ones you get in the store. It's just one of those things.
So here's an interesting question. We have a couple more questions. Nancy says, is there anything interesting about the moment of changeover?
Yeah, when you can catch it, you're almost in free fall. And that's what it's like to me, that moment where you've gone to the end of the pendulum and the pendulum just hangs there in a moment of equilibrium before it swings back. And that's always fun. I don't know that it means anything, but it's fun.
I think it's something to just notice experientially, and perhaps it can be a way to gently hone sensitivity to that kind of thing, to your energy level, to notice that. But at the same time, I mean, there's no significance to it in the sense of like, oh, this is a bad time or a good time.
Yeah, no, there's really not. And Sydney asks, do these states relate to the Enneagram or process? And the answer is yes, and we do not have the week or so that it would take to talk about that.
But that's a good question.
It is a very good question. So you and I can talk about that the next time we talk if you want.
Make a note so you don't forget. Yeah.
So just a quick one on that, because Sydney, I'm glad you pointed this out, because I was starting to see like the shift from expansion to contraction, or the other way around, that transition being from the 4 to 5, where you shift states from one to the other. So how do you think that relates to the 4 to 5, if at all?
It does, and that is often within a process. 4 is going to tend to be expansive, and 5 is going to tend to be contractive. And so, yeah, you can see that there frequently. Doesn't have to happen that way all the time, and it depends on the process. But in dealing with like human beings, that's going to often be the case. Like if you're doing the process of awakening, when you move from 4 to 5, 5 is the point of most work, and it's called the dark night of the soul for a reason. You will tend to be way more contracted and inward than outward at 5. But in the kitchen, there is not much of a state of expansion and contraction moving from 4 to 5. So it depends on the process. But yes.
Okay, so Sydney says, can a person experience layering of states based on different processes?
I'm sure that is a yes. At least that's my experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way I experience it personally is that there's a baseline, but then my relationship to particular things going on may have a different quality to it from the baseline, perhaps. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think in any process, you as the person going through that process may experience any of the states, expansion, contraction, all of that. Could be at any point. Though there will be some more likely than others to be one or the other. Okay, any more questions? Any answers? I love answers. That allows me to kick back and relax for a minute.
So I'll just throw out that on the kitchen, it may be fair to say that it does move from 4 to 5 into contraction, in the sense that like the food gets heated up and cooked, and then it even contracts by being consumed by the people in the community. So
Yeah, that would
it
be
does
at,
get pretty contractive.
yeah, that would be at 7 though. And it's at 5, heating is expansive.
Ye-
You heat
Yeah,
something and it
yeah,
expands. So you can look at it either way. We're talking metaphor here, so
right,
we can
right.
twist the metaphors around however we want.
Yeah, right. And I guess maybe another way to if just to test if I'm understanding this correctly, like the 5 back to the 9, is that generally a contraction in that whole process back to 9, when it's moving from 4 to 5, and is 1 to 4 generally expansive?
When it's moving from 4 to 5, it tends to go from uh, an expansive state to a more contracted state. When it hits 6, that's a shock point, and that can blow you into either state, depending on whether or not you get through the shock. At 7, that is almost always expansive. 7 is a very expansive point. So I don't think we can generalize a whole arc on this.
You don't think it's like a half and half kind of deal?
No, I think that it might be like alternating current between the points sometimes. But I frankly have not given this enough thought. I keep saying that tonight. I admit to my own ignorance.
Well, thank you.
Have to
This
sit-
is really helpful to have this back and forth. So thank you.
Good. Yeah. Well, I enjoy it, as you know.
It says there must also be more general expansion / contraction dynamics, right? Say more
Probably.
about that. What do you
Yeah.
mean?
I mean, more like in larger groups, or in like even areas or times of, cultural times. Like, let's say a whole culture can go into a phase of contraction or expansion, something like that.
Yeah.
I personally very much feel that's true.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure too. There are a lot of examples of that. Britain, when they stopped being an empire. Germany, after World War I, went into a serious state of contraction for a while. America is heading for a really big one in the next, 6 weeks or so.
A contraction or
Contraction, yes. Now, expansions are like, Andalusian Spain in the 10th century. There was a place of expansion, or Venice in the 14th century. So, yeah, groups of people can go through this. We're more interested right now in the individual. I figure when I get this down for myself to where I have it perfectly, then I'll worry about larger groups.
that's fair. Good question, Rowan. Thanks. David, what's coming up for you?
This talk is answering a lot of personal questions I have at this particular time.
Is there anything you
Yay.
feel comfortable sharing?
I'm injured right now, and it has caused a state of contraction.
Yes.
Oh,
that
yeah.
makes sense. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And that can be tough, isn't it? Because there's all this potential for inner narrations about, the good and bad of that experience. And right now it sucks to not be able to dance, I'm sure.
That's for sure. The inner narration is the worst part, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hang in there, man. No injury lasts forever. Actually, some of them do, but not this one.
Yeah.
And that, I think, pretty much covers all we have to say about this. So, are there other questions or anything that anybody wants to put forth?
Yeah,
Yay.
I wanted to try giving you an answer. No, you made a comment about how having conversation
Hmm.
can bring you into a state of expansion, like what we're
Yes.
having now. It's a dialogue with many of us.
Yeah.
I'm certainly feeling it. But then the opposite is in a state of contraction. Mushtaq was saying that we have a conversation, a story comes up that we tell. That story, that's like a monologue.
Yeah.
It's not a dialogue. It's for me, I'm not even there, present, listening to this monologue. Yet it's going on and bringing me down.
That's
half the
exactly
time.
right. Yeah.
And it's possible to have a conversation that makes us contract too.
Yep.
You know? But I mean, a satisfying, positive, or inspiring conversation, whatever that might mean in its given context, it typically does feel expansive. It gives us maybe energy. And then we leave that conversation with feeling like a bit picked up, I guess we could say. So, is that what you were saying, Jonathan? Is that what you mean?
Yes, exactly.
Thanks for sharing that. I'm glad. Yeah.
I think I have a question.
Yes.
So on this like scaling, I feel like me being in Brazil is a bit of a contraction period. But then day to day, I will go through waves of expansion and contraction.
Yep.
But is my time in Brazil more of a story than a contraction period?
No, your time in Brazil is your present experience. The stories that you tell about that is a slightly different thing. But yeah, your time in Brazil has definitely been a state of contraction for you, in that you are definitely being forced to focus more inward. You know, Brazil is rife with COVID and not necessarily the safest place in the world. And you've spent the last 8.5 months making a baby, which is hard work. So, yeah, you've been doing stuff where inwardness is appropriate. And hopefully you haven't been telling yourself too many stories about it.
I'm trying my best.
It's a practice in and of itself. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing, Sydney.
One more question?
Yes.
Oh, okay, Mr. Key.
Yeah, it's kind of long, they're kind of tired.
It's okay. You know, we have a few people we want to get to, so please, yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about the expansion, contraction related to the body, the head, and the heart. Like for example, if like David says injured, does that mean that the body is contraction, right?
Yeah.
Can we like doing the work on the head or the heart to expand? Like one is contract, the other is expand, and how to know like the limit? Oh, okay, I hit the limit of my expansion. Now it's time to construct.
Doesn't work quite that way.
No.
No, if you are working on yourself, you are working to be awake, first of all, to allow your centers to balance themselves. Expansions and contractions are going to happen. Don't think about it in terms of, oh, I am expanding my heart and contracting my moving center, stuff like that. That will not get you anywhere. Think about, I am moving to bring myself into balance and to be awake. And as I do this, I will move through states of expansion and contraction. They aren't related to a particular center necessarily. And it's maybe not as useful to think of them that way. Just notice what's going on. Notice whether you are moving towards one state or another, or if you're one state, notice how that affects your stories about your work. I'm in a state of contraction, and I go, my practices are not working for me anymore. I can tell because my energy is low. And that's my story. But it doesn't have to mean that. It can mean, oh, I've come to this point where I really need to turn inward and pull my energy back and focus it so that I can continue to create the awake state within myself. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, but I think I will think about it again.
Good. And
You have it.
Cherie has an interesting question. And
We have a
Ailey
few.
has
Yeah.
something. Yeah.
Roland has
You
one.
pick.
Right. Let's see. Oh, well, Ailey just has a remark. He says, when I'm meditating, then my awareness of expansion is huge.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Yep, it does make sense. Well, I mean, yeah, especially depending on the kind of meditation you're doing too.
Yeah. Well, we have to assume that he must be doing the right kind of meditation because he's not chanting Hare Krishna and going off.
So that kind of ties to Rowan's question, actually. Yeah. He asks, what are some of the practices related to this?
Self-observation. Very important practice when it comes to this. Because that's what's going to allow you to discern what's happening with your stories. Practicing your breath. Being in your breath. Always important. I mean, usually the first thing I say when somebody says, what should I do? Is, are you breathing? Are you doing your breath practice? How is your breath practice? So it always comes back to that. So breath practice, self-observation, observing your stories. Those are the basic practices for both expansion and contraction. And what else do we got here?
Can I ask something?
Yes.
You mentioned when you have a day like this with 2 talks, you do all the practices that get you into expansion. That's what made me wonder what these might be then.
Ah, you want the secret stuff.
Of course.
What gets me into a state of expansion and high energy is a lot of present moment practice. A lot of practice being awake, focusing my attention. I spend a lot of time getting my attention focused and single pointed. So from last night to this morning, I was focused on doing the talks. That was my object of meditation, as the yogis would say, was on doing the talks. And that helped create the focus, the will, and the intention to get my energy up to be able to do this. And trust me, 2 talks in one day is, you would think, oh, it's nothing. But it's not. It's a bit of a stretch, at least for me. You know, I'm old, I'm feeble. I got to, scrabble as best as I can.
Scrabble quite well.
Yeah, why, thank you. Now,
Yeah.
Cherie asks, is this like living in the will of God? And to which I always have to say, there is nothing that is not like living in the will of God.
What I was thinking of was when we're trying to force something from our own side and we miss that alignment. If God's purpose is for something and you're going against that flow, then that
you're
awareness.
resisting what is.
Resisting, that's a good word. You think, what? I'm trying to force something, or my focus is all on the wrong thing. And then that's where the observation comes in. And I do that in my stretch therapy practice with the clients and telling them, what are you observing first? When you're feeling that sensation in your body, what are you observing about yourself first? You don't have to answer me. Where's that coming from? Where's the motivation? And then you recognize your story and you can laugh at yourself, and then you can do something about it. You can't analyze the situation until you've really observed yourself. I said, just analyzing something and then just jumping straight into an action, you might have picked the wrong action. You got to just take a step back, take a breath, really take a breath. Just sit there for a second, just take a moment, and then really observe what action you need to take. You can't do that by being too quick. So it's that slowing down and then just being with it, and then having that sense today of noticing that, okay, to get ready for another talk, to be able to participate with my awareness, give yourself a rest, give yourself a moment, let that sense of energy gather itself and restore itself, and then you can feel that shift to go and do something else. You can't force these things, and that's why I feel like it's living in the will of God. When you're doing that, there's less pressure. If it's meant to be in a contracted state for longer, just accept it, just enjoy it. If you're injured, every time I get injured, I get quite excited about that, because I think, oh, now I've got more sympathy about something. Now I understand how that works. Now I can understand there's another way of working around that. When people criticize the things that I do, and I have to take a point of view, is that really true? Is it? And if it is that the opportunity to see things in a different way? So the contracted state is one of life's pleasures, actually.
I think so.
And I think the practice you mentioned, Mushtak, I think that can be used to kick up into an expanded state or downshift into a contracted state intentionally, can't it?
Yes.
Yeah, because both have their place. And it's important to remember that. Thanks, Sheree. We have not heard from Levita yet. What's coming up for you, Levita?
I'm gonna have to watch this video.
Yeah,
I'm gonna have to watch this video.
Yeah.
Yeah. When it comes to expansion and contraction, I've been in an extended state of contraction. And I think for me, the greatest struggle with it has been not struggling against it. Like, instead of just going, okay, this is what's going on, and riding the wave, so to speak, it's been kind of a struggle. Like, well, I'll do this to be more cheerful, and I'll act more cheerful. And it's exhausting because, you know, you'll be talking to people and you'll be like, and then when it's over with, it's like, then you have to go take a nap before you go to bed, kind of a thing. So that's my struggle with that. But a lot of it made sense, but I also know that I need to rewatch this to really extract the most from it.
Well, important to remember is that, I mean, at least here in the States, and I know this has been your experience as well as ours, like there's been a lot of kind of intentional contraction because we're staying home. We are choosing not to socialize for the most most part. I mean, now, things are in my life are changing a little bit, but that has been the ongoing pattern for literally almost 2 years now. And that can get comfortable, you know what I mean? In the sense that like that becomes the default state in a sense. And it's just like we talk about inertia too. So we have this inertia state of contraction, and it becomes all the harder to move out of that, perhaps. So even though we're saying, go with the flow and let it happen as it happens, in a way that's true for this as well, in the sense that we need to accept that this has been our normal. In many ways, it's been a choice. And it was an informed choice that we made based on the knowledge that we had. And at some point, a time will come where it makes sense to expand.
Yeah. I've noticed long ago that there are expansion and contraction with respect to communication. For example, you'll go through a period where you can't take a nap. You can't go to the bathroom, but the phone is ringing. People are knocking on the door. People want you to come out and do stuff. And then you'll go through a phase where you're like, did my deodorant give out? Why am I not hearing from anybody? And you'll call people and it goes to voicemail. People don't call you back. They don't email, no smoke signals, nothing. And it feels like everybody's withdrawn. And then after a while, all of a sudden, it's back to everybody's.
Yeah, everybody's reaching out. Everybody's trying to connect. Yeah.
Yeah. So with what's going on in the world today, there is the isolation of the voluntary contraction. And the voluntary contraction kind of calls for more connection, in the ways that you can. But then on top of that, you've got that ebb and flow where people are just like, okay, I don't want to talk to anybody now.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that conflicts with a person's need to connect. So that's kind of where I'm at in terms of trying to ride the wave, like trying to remember that it's just temporary. It's just part of an ongoing pattern, and not to take it personally and not to get overly bothered by it.
That makes sense to me. Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds very enlightened, but it sure does not feel that way.
Are you feeling like isolated, or are you feeling you need to withdraw? Where are you at with that?
I am isolated, but there's things that are in place that are helpful for that.
Yeah.
But I explained to somebody a while back that if you're normally by yourself in a non-pandemic situation, you go to the grocery store, you go to the greengrocer, you go to farmer's market, you pick up here, and everybody, you go there, now how are you today? I'm fine. And it's very surface interaction. It doesn't feel like much. If you went home and spoke to somebody and they said, did you talk to anybody today? You'd be like, no, because it's that superficial. But the decision to withdraw, to stay home because of the pandemic, all of a sudden there's this enormous hole of social interactions you're not getting. And it was a real shock to realize I haven't spoken to anybody in 2 days, like at all. So like now it's not so bad, but in the beginning it was a big shock. There used to be that Facebook meme that says, could you stay in this hut for a year and then you'd get $1 million? I notice I don't see those memes anymore.
That's so
I'm over
true.
here like, where's my $1 million, dude?
That's such a good point. Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of us are going through our own versions of that, I would imagine. So thank you for sharing, Levita. And you can always reach out to, I'm sure most or any of us would be happy to connect when you need it. Yeah.
Or even if you don't need it, if you just want
Yeah,
it.
even if you just want it. Absolutely. But just putting that out there. Yeah. Yep. Amy says the pandemic is almost over in the Netherlands. No lockdowns
Yay.
anymore. Yeah. I mean, at this point, sometimes it's a personal comfort, like your personal threshold for the pandemic being over or not. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
That's how it's going to be once we have all the official stuff out of the way. And we're going to have to follow our rhythms then, especially.
Yep. So I think that we have said as much as we can say on this subject for this moment.
Yeah, but thank you so much for joining us,
And I'm
especially
going to
our
switch over to
newcomer.
Brady Bunch mode here.
Yeah.
Voila.
Hey guys, let's wave to each other and everyone watching on
Been
YouTube.
nice to have you all here this evening.
Yes.